Hello, hello, hello. How are you doing today? I have a guest, and well, I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about herself. But first, I'm going to tell you it's Lorie Tesny. And Lorie does something that I guess a lot of you don't even know I used to do. Um, a lot, a lot. And she is living a life that's so interesting and so in the moment. And she has an amazing podcast. So I thought, you know what? We've got to bring her on so you guys can all meet her. Lorie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Kelly, for having me. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, when I saw your podcast, I was so excited. So tell everybody a little bit about you, and then we'll just talk about what you do.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Lorie, and I have a podcast called Sailing Through Life, and that is appropriately named because that is exactly what I'm doing right now. And the events that led up to doing that right now goes back about 5 years, and I was diagnosed with stage 3 melanoma. And through that event, I tried to do what most people would do. I think you just try to get back to your normal life, what you were doing previous. And about a month after I was all clear and everything was good, it came back. And so I had faced this a second time, very close together to the first diagnosis. And then COVID hit. And so I decided it was time to make some changes in my life. And so now it's a sailboat in the Atlantic Ocean, and I'm truly sailing through life.
Uh, see, I don't know if I even mentioned this to you. I did a lot of sailing, like before I had my last company, and before I started doing all the stuff that I do now with the hiking and biking and backpacking and everything. I was a sailor and sailed a lot, raced and sailed and
Mhm.
delivered boats around the world and had so much fun. And for those of you who are not sailors, I will tell you the sailing life it's amazing. It's more work than you would think. People think it's like, oh, you just get on a boat and,
Cocktails
you know,
and yeah.
right. You just, yeah, you have cocktails and that's all you do, right? Maybe catch a fish, but it's
Right.
a little bit of work. So, one of the things that got me so excited when I saw your podcast and what you do is the fact that you went from like every day, call it normal, okay?
Hmm.
Because that's the word that, is like the usual, every day, the usual world, to doing something completely different.
Yes.
And so that's got to be a leap of faith and a huge amount of courage. How'd you do that?
I think facing a health challenge created that momentum to have faith because you have no control. You have control over what you're doing, but you are we're operating in a different place. And trying to be a survivor of something really changes how your thought process is. Um, Going through it a second time really started that reevaluation of my life and what was really important. I was, at the time, I had been working in a funeral home. I had been in the funeral industry, and um, it was a reality check to see that there were people that I was dealing with. There were families I was dealing with that had a loved one who had the same diagnosis.
Oh
And
gosh.
I was seeing people my age with my cancer, and they weren't here anymore. And there's a lot of psychology that was involved in that. Um, and going through that process and then layering on a pandemic really forced me to stop and think about what is it that I really want to do. You know, at the gate, you really want to just be yourself and do what you've always done because that's your comfort zone. Um, Having cancer twice takes you out of your comfort zone quite a bit. And then dealing with something nobody's ever dealt with before, that's living with a pandemic, I just kept getting further and further away from what was normal. And at that point, I realized, since everything is so skewed right now, Everything is so unusual right now. Maybe it's time to do those things. You have a lot of thoughts about how much longer you're going to be here, what you're going to be able to do. And like you were saying, sailing is a lot of work. It is very physical. And while I still had the ability to maneuver and do the things I wanted to do, it became the decision to make this transition in life. And it was a very big transition. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of compromise. Um, and it was moving away from family. So there were a lot of pieces that had to come into play. And it was amazing how, as we started getting this momentum and making all these decisions, how everything kind of just laid out in front of us and it just kind of came to be. And I guess you kind of feel like you're on the right path as something like this happens, because things happen that you can't explain. There was a bigger force involved in accommodating this new life.
That reminds me, and I cannot for the life of me actually quote the quote, but it's about how once you make a decision, things move in the direction of what you've decided that,
Mm-hmm.
that you never ever expect to have happen.
Right.
So that's, I mean, it's so inspiring to me, because I know a lot of people, actually years and years ago, I knew tons of people who had stopped what they were doing and went sailing.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them had been planning it for a very long time.
Right.
This had been like a life goal for
Yeah.
5 years, 10 years, 30 years, right? And for you just to turn it, make a decision and go. That tells me that you are not just an adventurer, you're someone who has to see life from a bit of an uplifting, and as it's something that's working for you, don't you?
You do. And that's why I said I think the going through the cancer diagnosis twice and then the pandemic, it was back to back to back. Literally in August of 2017, I was diagnosed. In October, I was clear. In January of 19, I was re-diagnosed. And in February of 2020, I finished treatment. And then March happened and it was a pandemic. So there was no stopping
Wow.
to let it all settle in. And that is kind of the backside to the story, is once you stop with all this stuff just back to back to back, then you have that trickle down of all that's happened, and it's a lot to process sometimes. And I think your mindset plays a really big part of how you get through this healthily, how you get through this and not implode, because
Yeah,
it's a lot to process.
it is
And
a
I
lot.
think
I'm
that
yeah.
doing the podcast, I started that before all this other stuff happened. I did it as I finished treatment, and the first time around, and I was thinking about what to do, and then the second time around I'm like, I'm doing this. And I think that was a gift to get me through this, because then I was connecting people with people who had that same mindset that I wanted, that were understanding of what I was going through, who were uplifting me. And then I, in turn, was turning that around and sharing it with other people. And I really believe that benefited me on a lot of levels. And that is why I continue to do this, even though some days it's a lot for me. And doing it on a boat and all sorts of elements that create interesting aspects. Um, it's been worth it, because like right now, I would have never met you had I not been doing this. And then the benefit of meeting you and hearing your story empowers me to keep moving on, because I know that there's that momentum behind you, that energy that will recharge me. So it's been incredible to have the opportunity to do this. And that's why I said the podcast is a wonderful reward.
So it's what is it? A rising tide lifts all ships. So
Yes.
we're lifting each other. And
Yep.
that was, I mean, that's what got me, other than the fact that you're a sailor. That's the reason I had to reach out to you. I was like, well, someone who's done all this been through what you've been through and still step out and still have, all that stuff to look forward to and do it like with this big, huge smile. For those of you who are listening to the podcast, you just need to hop over to YouTube, see Lorie's smile. She's got this beautiful big smile. And it's just so serendipitous, right?
Yeah.
That we are here for each other. And that's something I've found like in the community that I have. It's just like all these women, these amazing women are there for each other, whether it's for accountability or community or storytelling or, adventure shares. It's just so interesting how hearing one person's story can change your day, change
Mhm.
your life, change your mindset. And I really appreciate that. So tell us this. Okay.
Okay.
Now the sailor in me has to ask some questions. Where
All
are you
right.
going? Tell us what you're planning.
Well, we are doing a modified cruising life. Because of health insurance, we've had to modify what we can do because I still have doctor's appointments and things that I need to take care of. So we do local cruising, coastal cruising, and just getting a boat and being out on the ocean. Our previous experience was on one of the Great Lakes, and that was a great experience because those are shallow lakes and they can churn up pretty fast. So you can get pretty much the same
Right.
experience as on the ocean in a split second. But doing it with tides and different things that we weren't used to has been a good learning experience. And just learning about the boat and being cohesive with that vessel and understanding the power that it has and feeling like you have some control, which is where sailing through life it all goes full circle, just like in life. There's the things you can control and things you have to respond to. And the more practice you have at doing something, the more you work into your regular life, those things, the easier they are to deal with. But there are things you can't plan for. And you just have to know that you could do your best in that moment. And like you were saying, sailing isn't just cruising with a cocktail and hors d'oeuvres. There's a lot of physicality to that. And you do have to respond quickly because people's lives are at stake. And so preparing for your journey, whenever you go out, you look at your charts, you look at your winds, you look at what's going to be in the day, what the waves are going to be like, and you plan accordingly. And if it doesn't look like a good day to do it, then you don't put yourself in that situation. But if you get caught out there, you have certain things that you know and you practice to keep yourself safe. And I think the joy in sailing for me is being connected to something bigger than yourself. It is understanding the power that nature has. And when you're out there, as powerful as you think you are, there's a lot more out
You're
there
not
that you're just a little dot in a big ocean. And that makes it interesting. But when you are in sync, when you are sailing and you're on a good tack and the wind is just perfect and you're cutting along and you hear the waves hitting the boat and you feel the power at the helm, there is something you've captured. You've captured a fragment of what is there, and it's pushing on a piece of fabric that is attached to a floating vessel, and it's pushing you along. And these boats are heavy, and you think about how much wind is needed to do that, and it does it so effortlessly. And it's a zen kind of thing that happens, and it's also a reality that you are so small in this universe, but yet everything makes a difference. Every move you make makes a difference. And that's where I found that parallel to life and sailing and what I've been through. And it's so all just kind of funnels into this experience right now.
So true. And so for those of you listening who haven't sailed, you might want to just since this is dropping in the summer, If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, you might want to just go for a little sail trip because you'll find something. There is something magic in it. So before we wrap up, let me ask you something.
Mhm.
If there is somebody out there listening right now who's thinking, I need to make some change in my life. I need, my course needs correcting.
Right.
What would you say? Like, is it the commitment? What is it that you would suggest that if somebody's ready to make a reasonably big change in their life, what could they do?
Yes, I believe that the commitment to do it, and if it takes writing down things and making it tangible, thinking is one thing, and putting it into motion is another. So start writing down the things that you really want to change. Write down the things you really want to see in your life and start making small movements towards those things, because it's not a big leap. This was a big leap in when you step outside of it, but it was all the little steps that it took to get here that is what mattered. And so taking those smaller steps and making those movements toward what you want will get you to that big result, but it's just so much easier and so much more peaceful when you can do it in smaller increments and just take that momentum and move forward.
That's so true. It's amazing. And it's interesting because you're bringing me back to myself. Um, the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot going on. A
Mhm.
lot. I've been off my schedule, and I've noticed that I've been missing some of my meditations. I haven't been writing. And this morning I was like, whoa, you are off kilter, Kelly. What is going on?
Mhm.
And I thought, what's going on is that you haven't stopped, centered yourself,
Yes.
looked at what it is that you want, and started taking those small steps instead of what I've been doing lately, which is like these massive leapfrogs that, are good at certain times in
Yeah.
life, but they're not sustainable.
No. No.
You just can't
Yeah,
keep
there are
expecting to
days
leap.
in that you have checklists that you just have to be checking things off. I get that. But when you have that moment to just sit and find that thing in your life that's going right and focus on it, and then figure out what it is that needs to be changed, and just start making those small movements. You'll be amazed at how far you'll get and how quickly it'll happen.
Well, thank you. And that was brilliant. So we will definitely link to your podcast. But for anybody listening, if you're already listening on a podcast label, then just jump over to Sailing Through Life podcast. We'll link to it in the show notes. But once again, that's Sailing Through Life podcast. And thank you so much for being here. You're going to have to keep us up to date
I
on what's going
will.
on. We
I
expect
will.
photos. We expect photos and stories.
Well, social media is full of them. So yes, if anybody checks that out, they'll see some of our
Oh, yes.
adventures.
Where is it? Sailing Through Life on Facebook
Podcast.
also?
Yep. Yeah,
Nice.
Sailing Through Life podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn is in the works. So
Awesome. Awesome. So
yep.
nice. Well, thank you so much for being here,
Thank
Lorie. I
you.
really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate it.